Hello and welcome to the fall Master's Student Orientation for CICS 2020. My name is Mark Horner. I'm the director of the Master's program. I also happen to be a faculty member here in the department. So this is obviously a recorded orientation, which is unfortunate because there are usually a lot of questions during this orientation that I get that it makes it a really good time to answer all those questions. But we are proceeding as best we can, and so as you have questions, I will try to remember what questions have been in the past during this presentation and fill in the details as we go. But inevitably, you're going to have a lot of questions for us and for our staff about how the master's program works and what's expected of you and what's different, obviously, about this online start that many of you are doing for the fall. We'll just kind of dive right in and try and muddle through all of this and give you as much information to start with as possible. All of you are in perhaps different circumstances than you would normally be. So if you happen to be in the United States already, you may be living near campus or not and taking classes online. You may be in a completely different time zone in a completely different country taking classes online. You may have deferred for the spring, but hopefully all of this information should still apply to you. It will just have to be adapted around the fact that you will be starting in a slightly different way than you normally would start our program. That said, we're very happy to have you in whatever form we can get you, and we really, really do look forward to having you in person in the very near future. We are hoping that perhaps in the spring we'll have classes in person, though nobody really knows what's going to happen. So we all have our fingers crossed. We would like to have all of you here for sure. We find that students on campus have a great experience, and bringing all of that back is a primary goal for us. But we have to do kind of what is dictated by the government and by the university, and we're trying to follow all those rules as best we can. Okay, so I'm going to go over three main topics during this presentation. I'm going to talk about advising and about how you get your questions answered while you're here in the program. What college life is like, that is the thing that will be the most different perhaps around things like buildings and offices. I will try to tell you about these things even though they really don't apply for most of you or really any of you at this point. But when you come on campus, maybe you'll recall some of this information and this will help you. We'll also talk a lot about courses and about requirements. This is where a lot of the nitty-gritty is about what classes you want to take or have to take in order to graduate and how to plan your schedule. Okay, so first we'll start with advising and about advisors. We'll talk a little bit about funding and how that works. And about what we call terminal MSs and research MSs and things like that. Okay, so let's start with advising. You have an official advisor. Your official advisor is Elizabeth Perolsky. You may have corresponded with her already. She, I believe, is probably making a video presentation right after mine, I think, but you will get to meet Elizabeth at least virtually in the very near future. She is your primary advisor. So if you have a question about what you should do in our program or how things work, she is most likely the person that you should speak to first. She does have an office in what is called the Letterly Graduate Research Building. Obviously, she's not there. You won't be going to go see her there, well, at least in the fall, but maybe in the spring, you'll get to see her in her advising office in the low rise, or perhaps next fall, or whenever it is that we're back in person. Her email address is listed here. It's very easy to find. And so if you have any questions about, I'm thinking about doing this, or I'm thinking about doing this, or I have this kind of a problem, Elizabeth is probably going to be your first contact. Now, one thing about advising is if you run into problems, and this really covers the gamut of everything, but you know, you have a disagreement with your professor in a class, or you have some difficulty in your life that needs to be addressed, if somebody is sick, or financial difficulties, or you're having trouble with the course's content, Elizabeth is really your best first contact. And I really do urge you to ask her questions very freely. That's why she's there. She is there just for master's students to answer your questions. So if you have any kind of difficulty at all, I also urge you to ask about them very early. It is very hard sometimes to solve a problem where students will come after a semester is over and said, I had a problem at the beginning of the semester, but I'm just asking you about it now. So really, if you have a problem, ask about it immediately. As soon as this problem comes up, don't be shy. Elizabeth is very, very friendly and is there to answer your questions. And so ask early, and she can either help you solve your problem or perhaps redirect you to something, some service that would be on campus or virtually that can help you, okay? And the university, unlike maybe whatever university you went to or college you went to before, we have lots of resources around lots of different things. Student life, mental health, financial assistance, all sorts of things that might be of help for whatever particular problem you might have. So ask early, and please ask Elizabeth as soon as you can. Okay, I may also be of assistance. I'm not trying to tell you that I can't help you. You probably want to ask Elizabeth first. Most of the people who end up coming to me for assistance have a problem that Elizabeth can't solve, which isn't very many problems. And those problems tend to be very, very problematic, serious problems that Elizabeth doesn't quite know how to help you through. So I'm here to help you, of course, but a lot of things Elizabeth is going to answer for you. If you have very, very, very acute and very serious problems that Elizabeth cannot help you with, then you should email me and we'll see what we can do for you. We also have Eileen Hamill, who you may have corresponded with as well. Eileen Hamill is our graduate program manager. It's a little hard for you to maybe understand from outside of the university what the difference is between a program manager and an advisor is. But essentially, Eileen Hamill is here to help you through the nuts and bolts or the machinery of the program, primarily around graduation and requirements and some things like that. So often, if it's something that involves some paperwork, Eileen is the person who helps you, but typically Elizabeth is the person who's going to help you with most things. Elizabeth will from time to time, or sorry, Eileen from time to time will email you with a request to say fill out some form or something like that, and please respond to her as quickly as you can. Eileen may, so if you run into a problem that Elizabeth knows only Eileen can solve, then you may be sent to Eileen. I just want you to know about the three people here who are primarily here to help you. So that kind of covers, advising and help, and we can go from there. So also, it bears mentioning that if you get involved in research with a faculty member, that faculty member often becomes your kind of primary advisor. It's not that you need an official advisor, it's that sometimes that research connection is the person who can give you the best advice about what you should do. So what classes should you take? You're thinking about applying to a PhD program, how do you do that? Those kinds of questions a faculty member might be willing to help you with if you're working with them on research. Of course, even after class, in normal times, it depends on how this kind of works in the fall, but normally faculty members are very approachable after class. It's a great time to get a hold of them and say, what do you think about this? I'm thinking about working on this. I have this research topic in mind. Who in the department might be working on something that's related to that kind of questions. You can also ask faculty members this kind of stuff as well. Okay, so this is something that we've had for a long time. It's maybe helpful to you to think about what's your goal in getting a master's degree at UMass. And we think about these as two kind of general groupings of how you might conduct your studies while you're here. These are completely, this is very important, very informal things called tracks. They don't really exist in any formal sense. It's not something on your transcript. It's not something that you sign up for. It's not something, it's only in your own mind about how you are thinking about what you want to do with your master's degree when you finish it. And so one can think about it as two general categories. One is what we call a professional master's degree, which sometimes is referred to a terminal master's degree. I don't particularly like that term because it sounds rather kind of ominous and deadly. But so there's a terminal master's program or professional master's program, as well as a research track that you can think about. The idea with a professional master's program, which most of you are kind of fall into this category, which is that you're going to stop going to school after you get your master's degree here. You will most likely then go off into industry and go work for Amazon or Google or what have you, or for some healthcare company. And so your end goal here is to really get through the classes, finish your preparations, and then go and get a job, okay? So those students who fall into that category, again, that is most students in the program, would maybe try to focus a little bit more on the 500 level classes versus the 600 level classes. You wouldn't necessarily try to get involved in any kind of research project or independent study or something like that. It's really take your classes, get some great instruction from our faculty members, and then find a position in industry. So that's going to be the bulk of the students, and that's probably what most of you are interested in doing, and that's great. The alternative for a lot of students is that some people are interested in actually doing a PhD after their master's degree. They may do their PhD here at UMass, and we can talk a little bit about what that might look like, or doing a PhD at some other institution somewhere in the world or in the United States. Okay, so those students need to do some things that perhaps are a little different. So you might focus a little bit more in the 600 level classes. And most importantly, really, is to focus on getting involved in some sort of research opportunity here at UMass. This distinction between 500 level and 600 level classes may also be kind of new to you. The university numbers classes from 100, 200, 300, 400, which is really undergraduate classes, and then 500 and 600 level, and then we do have 700 level classes, but it's kind of a meaningless designation. The 500 level classes tend to be easier than these 600 level classes. That said, this stuff is completely up to the instructor about how difficult a class ends up being. It is a very, very vague guideline. What you will find is that undergraduates in our program sometimes take 500 level classes, and so those 500 level classes tend to be taught at a slightly easier level, or a more beginner level, for graduate students than a 600 level class. But this is by no means some sort of universal rule where all these classes are carefully calibrated to make them exactly somehow kind of difficult, right? It's impossible to do that. And classes actually switch between different faculty members teaching in different semesters, and so the difficulty of a class can vary wildly, really, just even from semester to semester or year to year. So this 500 level or 600 level thing is a bit vague, honestly, and it really depends on the class that you're talking about how kind of difficult that class is. That said, 589, which is a machine learning class, and 689, which is also a machine learning class, 589 does tend to be easier for students than 689. Okay, so if you are thinking about getting a PhD after you do your master's degree here, you would want to take perhaps more 600 level classes. You might want to focus on doing research projects with faculty members. We can talk about, we'll talk maybe a little bit in this presentation about how you would get into a PhD program after you finish your master's degree. I can give you some advice about that, but honestly, the person who's going to give you the best advice about that would be your research advisor. If you are not doing research and planning to do a PhD, you're doing something wrong, right? So I mean, that's kind of the whole point of getting the PhD, is to get involved in research and use that as a way of getting into a PhD program, either here or elsewhere. Keep in mind that there is no sort of automatic pathway from our master's program into our PhD program. If you want to get into the PhD program here at UMass, you have to apply. And you are subject to the same levels of admission standards that any other PhD student applying would have. That said, you can use your master's degree classes towards finishing your PhD. It's a little bit complicated about how that works, but we can kind of address, often what you want to do is address that with your research advisor as you go along if you become interested in that. But just be aware, if you wanted to do a PhD here, you would have to apply just like any other student. Okay. So funding. So people ask a lot about this, and hopefully you read the offer letter carefully because it explains some of this. Okay. So there are certain things that are available to you to make money, and some things that are not available to you as a master's student. So things that are available to you are jobs such as being a grader. There are also some various kinds of staff programming jobs that you can have. You can even be working on a research project as a programmer, and be paid for that. Okay. There are a bunch of hourly positions on campus. Master's students have worked everywhere from, doing research programming to working in the library, or working with the alumni association, or working in the dining hall, or whatever. So there's lots of different kinds of hourly positions. Obviously, most of those would require your physical presence here on campus. So honestly, most of those probably don't apply to you in this fall semester, especially because the dining hall is almost entirely closed this fall. I don't think the library is open, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of that is a little bit off the table for the moment. However, there may be other hourly positions that are done remotely. Now, if you have not started here in the United States, my understanding is that it is very problematic in having you start some kind of job remotely. So if something is offered to you, or you find out about something, you may find that this is just not going to happen this fall. I don't know, I guess I don't know too much more about it, but the university was telling us that it was very difficult to start students in jobs if they have not yet entered into the country. If you have worked at other jobs at UMass before, say you were one of our undergraduates or something like that, that's a different story. And different rules apply. So you may have to ask us about this if there's something that you think you can do, and we can help you make sure that you could do it. There is a job board. There's something called Handshake. So we'll talk a little bit about our CICS careers office, which is there to help you through all of this. They actually can be very helpful in finding both on-campus positions, summer positions at companies, and jobs for after when you graduate. There are fellowships, research fellowships and things like that are sometimes available for master's students. Often they're not open to master's students, they're just open to PhD students. They tend to be extremely competitive, but you are able to have a fellowship if you can find one. So one of the best known ones is the NSF fellowship. However, I do warn you, highly competitive. And unless you have some kind of something that you think is going to get you one of these fellowships, it may not be worth your time. They're really looking for kind of, really research-oriented students and things like that have demonstrated research experience and things like that. Okay, some things that are not available to you, and this is spelled out in the offer letter, which is assistantships, TAs, RAs, so teaching assistantships, research assistantships, and this is even outside of CICS. So that means that even in the physics department or ECE or anything like that, you will not be able to hold one of these positions. And you will, of course, if you were in the room, you would ask me, but why? Why can I not have a TA position or an RA position? And it really comes down to some accounting rules, which is that if you have an RA position that pays a certain amount, that it automatically invokes something called a tuition waiver, meaning that you don't have to pay tuition. And just to be blunt, if you don't pay tuition, then the computer science department and CICS doesn't get any money for your education. And so basically master's students, this doesn't apply to PhD students, are prohibited from having TA and RA positions. This doesn't apply if you happen to be watching this and you are what we call a Bay State student. So a Bay State student is a student who went through our undergraduate program and did fairly well, and then we admitted them into our master's program. If you are a Bay State student, it depends on what level of Bay State student you are, whether you can hold a TA or an RA, but basically the Bay State fellows are offered TA positions, half TA positions typically, and that is the exception to the rule. So the one exception to the rule. If you can find a very, a less than 10-hour position, RA position, in some cases you're allowed to hold those because they don't invoke a tuition waiver. But before you even attempt to look at RA positions or TA positions in other departments or within our own department, be aware that there are very, very strict rules that are kind of no exception rules around doing this. There are a few niggly exceptions that we do have. So for instance, if you had been admitted to our own PhD program, we change these rules for you, but that applies to very few students. Okay, so those are not available to you. Okay, so normally I ask you for questions, but obviously you're not here, so I can't have any questions. But if you have questions, think about these things. Elizabeth will probably help you through a lot of this stuff as we go, and maybe we need a FAQ or something like that. This is all a little different than how we normally do it, but hopefully, hopefully some of this has helped you. Okay, so department life. Now this has obviously changed a lot, but I'm going to tell you about these things anyway, in the expectation that you will be on campus sometime in the near future. So there are offices. We have a building. I haven't actually, personally, I have not been in my own office since March. So I'm assuming the building is still there. But we do have basically two buildings for the college. One is the CICS building, and it used to be basically historically, the computer science department was in this building called the LGRC. We outgrew the LGRC. We built a new building called the CICS building. All of us moved over there to the CICS building. We have since outgrown that building and then moved back into and taken over this building called the LGRC. Computer science has obviously grown and changed a lot. When I started teaching in 2003, we had 300 undergraduates. Now we have something like 1,300 undergraduates. We had 35 master's students, and now we have about 350 master's students. So things have changed a lot. Our faculty has grown quite a bit, and we've expanded over these two buildings. Now, one of you will go out and make $1 bazillion, and you can rename the CICS building after yourself, or even better, you will be able to build us a giant marble encrusted building, you know, with your name on it, and then, you know, my office can be at the top or whatever. Okay, so the CICS building is our main building. That's where the main office is. That's where my office happens to be, but our faculty is split across the two buildings. Eileen is in the CICS building, and many professors' offices are in the CICS building. That said, there's another building that's not so far away, and when you come to campus, this is not so hard to find, but there's something called the Letterly Graduate Research Center, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's called the LGRC. Sometimes it's just called the Low Rise. It is called the Low Rise because right next to the Letterly Graduate Research Center is the Letterly Graduate Research Tower. And the tower is a 25-story building. The Letterly Graduate Research Center is a 3-story building. And so sometimes they call that the low rise. So if you hear people use that word, that's what they mean. Okay, there are faculty offices there, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, and I don't know, we keep invading more parts of this building as time goes on. So we maybe have taken over the 1st floor as well, but we're slowly invading that whole thing. The advising office is in the LGRC, so that's where Elizabeth's office is, and so if you're gonna meet with Elizabeth in person, that's where you're gonna find her. There's a master's student space there. Obviously that doesn't really apply to you at the moment. It is a very, the master's student space, I think I have a slide on that in a sec, but we'll see that. Okay. Oh, actually, maybe I don't. So there's a master's space. There's a code to get into the room. I'm just not going to worry about that until you're on campus. But basically, there's a code that you use to get into the room, and it's kind of I would describe this as a very, people who like quiet and solitude kind of room. You know, there's no windows and it's very quiet. And so maybe a good place to really work on a proof or something like that. It's not a very social space. There are lots of other spaces on campus, and inside the two buildings, they're a little bit more open and better places to meet people. You know, you'll have to kind of see it when you get onto campus and orient yourself. around these two buildings. There's a lot of spaces to meet people. For instance, the CICS building has a cafe in it with coffee and sandwiches and stuff like that. A lot of people meet there. It's obviously not open right now, but hopefully will be soon. Okay, research talks. So normally there is at least once a week, there are a lot of research talks. And there are a lot of different kinds of research talks. So we have everything from PhD dissertation proposals and defenses. Sometimes we just have invited speakers because somebody's in town and we invite them to come give a research talk. Sometimes there's distinguished lecture series where we have the preeminent people in computer science come for a very selective series of talks. One of the greatest sources of talks that we have is from interviewing new faculty members. Those, oddly enough, tend to be some of the best talks because these newly graduated PhDs are often extremely motivated to give a great talk, and so they've really practiced it and polished it and figured out how to make it accessible to a broad audience, et cetera, et cetera. So some of those do tend to be some of the best talks. We don't really know what the hiring situation is going to look like, so I'm not sure I would see a lot of hiring talks this fall, but there will be some talks this fall. We still have PhD students who are trying to propose defenses and things like that. I don't know about the invited talks, et cetera, but you will hear about these through email, and then obviously those are going to be recorded or be streamed live for you to watch. And they're great. I mean, they're really, a lot of them are really, really very interesting. It's a great way to learn about the very, very cutting edge areas of research and do so in kind of an interactive and fun way. They're great to pick up on new areas that you might be interested in, learn something about another area, et cetera. So there's a lot of great stuff that you can see in these talks. I do really urge you to watch them. Sometimes there's food involved in them, obviously not for this fall, but it's also just a great kind of social thing where people see each other. A lot of talks are preceded by coffee and tea and things like that. So great stuff, and hopefully we can get that moving again very soon. We do also do some seminars about graduate student life, about professionalism, about, say, how to write a grant proposal, which may not be interesting to you yet, but will be possibly interesting to you if you want to go get a PhD at some point. Or things about ethics, or things about how to interview and things like that. So there's a bunch of professionalism seminars as well. You'll see all of these announcements come through your email. Just read them and see, you know, what's interesting for you, and take a chance and watch something, you know, that might possibly be interesting to you. Okay, so careers and internships. Obviously, this is a big topic for all of you. Eventually, you will have to go become productive members of society. The great thing about CICS is that we're large enough to have our own careers office. Many universities go to are a centralized career office, which UMass does also have a career office for the campus. But your best resource as a computer science student is our own CICS careers office. It's run by Brian Crissell. His office is in the LGRC, which you won't be going to, but he will be facilitating all sorts of things to help you find internships and careers. There are internship fairs. I guess they're going to be remote. I have no idea how that works or what that looks like, because I don't have any idea how that's going to work. But I'm sure Brian is probably going to fill you in on what some of these internship fairs and tech job fairs look like. You know, companies in the United States are still hiring lots of people to work. It's a little bit of a different time. It's going to be a little bit tricky, but it's people are still hiring. The tech industry is still doing very, very well. So you want to start working on your resume if you're looking for an internship, even for next summer. There's a whole web page that will explain a lot of things to you. There's this thing called Handshake that you sign up for, and that'll help you through a lot of the career stuff. So just keep your ear to your email, so to speak, to find out about all of these things. I believe that Brian probably even runs some stuff for helping people improve their resumes. You probably want to have somebody look at your resume before you start passing it around. Okay, so this whole, so Elizabeth and I will probably not counsel you about how to get careers or a job, because we have this whole great office, and they have a whole bunch of people who work in the office that are dedicated to helping you find the right internship or job for you. So the careers office in conjunction with Elizabeth also handles CPT stuff. Talk a little bit about CPT stuff as well. Okay, so CPTs. This only applies to international students. If you are a domestic student, if you are a citizen of the United States, or you have a green card or whatever, ignore everything I'm about to say because it doesn't apply to you at all. Okay, we do encourage international students on F1 visas to do a CPT over the summer. So this is the curriculum practical training thing that is a visa that you can get to allow you to work during the summer. So typically done during the summer. Now, these are a set of rules that are changing a little bit as we develop some new things, and as we are watching the United States government change some rules on from underneath us every once in a while. So this little caveat here under the title is very, very important. Everything is subject to change due to COVID-19 and the US federal government guidance. So you will note, even over the summer, rules were shifting from week to week, lawsuits are flying, things are changing. We have a very, very good office on campus, which is IPO. If you're an international student, you already know about our IPO office, our International Programs Office, who are watching and are involved in all of this stuff very, very, very heavily. So sometimes, or often, if you have a complicated or even some sort of non-standard visa type question, I'm going to refer you out to the IPO office because they are really the experts in this, and I would never, ever want to tell you the wrong thing. So, so I will be a little bit careful about some stuff. Okay, we do want you to do a CPT over the summer. Now, normally what would happen if you were starting in the fall is you would do classes in the fall, you would do classes in the spring, and then you would do a CPT over the summer. Because there is a rule that says you must have completed 2 semesters at UMass in person, with an F1 visa in the United States before beginning a CPT. We are working very hard right now to put something in place to allow us to, it's not that we don't have to follow this rule, it's that we follow a different rule which says that if you have a program that requires you to do a practicum or internship or what have you immediately, then this rule no longer applies. So our plan, which I am personally working on as we speak, is to enable students to have a concentration as part of their master's degree that will require them to do some kind of internship, practicum, co-op type thing over the summer, or immediately as soon as they become resident in the United States. So our probable, we're very sure that we'll be able to get this done to put this concentration in place so that you can say, if you were online in the fall as an international student, you come here in the spring, and then you would be able to do a CPT in your first summer. Or even, so that would be kind of what we're aiming for. Now, that said, if the federal government gives us more specific guidance that says that this kind of thing is not allowed or something like that, then there's really nothing that we're going to be able to do about it. But we are working very, very hard in order to try and make this happen. Now, the one thing is that we do want you to have done at least 6 credits in our program before you go off and do a CPT. That will be no problem probably for almost all of you, either because you're doing 3 classes this fall, or you're doing a class this fall and a class in the spring or something like that, and then you can do the CPT in the summer. So we are working very hard on making that happen. So you just kind of have to wait for us to get through this process. I have to make a proposal to this faculty senate, and they have to look through it, and we will hopefully be able to get all of this done in time. We will let you know. Okay, the other rule, you must be enrolled full-time if you're doing a CPT during the fall or spring. This rule is also something that has changed very recently. We're not doing anything for this fall, but hopefully starting even perhaps as soon as the spring, there's been a rule change that has allowed us to do a CPT during the semester without having you be enrolled in any classes at the time. So there, under this sort of previous rule, I know this is very confusing. It actually confuses me half the time. You would only really be able to do a CPT in a local job, but the way that this rule has now been changed, and something that we hopefully can have people do either probably starting next fall is what I'm expecting. We'll see maybe for the spring, is that students will be able to do a CPT during the kind of academic, the normal academic semester, even though, and still not have to, basically not have to take classes at UMass Amherst while doing that CPT. There are lots of caveats that come along with this. For instance, you can't do that in your last semester, after you've finished all of your requirements. You can't do it then. If you do more than, I believe it's more than 12 months of full-time CPT work, then you are no longer eligible for an OPT, or it cuts into your OPT time and things like that. That's normally not a problem. You really shouldn't be doing 12 months of CPT. You should just be finishing your classes and doing that. We do have a webpage that explains all of this, but the rules, as I said, this fall, we are trying to work on things that allow us to relax some of these rules that we've had in the past. So we're working very hard on getting some of the CPT stuff to be more flexible for our students, because most international students are very, very interested in doing a CPT, and I encourage you to do it. It's a great experience if you can find a job through our careers office to do that CPT. If we're still online in the spring and we still can't get visas for students to come to the United States, then obviously CPT next summer is going to be off the table. Okay, but you just have to keep your eyes on this, and we should have more news about this sometime during the late fall is what I'm expecting to help students through this. But just expect that there'll be some more flexibility for CPT. Okay, so next, the last thing is about the requirements of the master's degree, what the courses look like, et cetera, et cetera. So most of you, or all of you that are watching this video, will have signed up for at least one class for the fall. Now, the way the classes operate for the fall is remote learning, and each class is going to be a little different. They will all be asynchronous in the sense that there will be, the lectures will be asynchronous for you to match whatever time zone you're in. But then there may be some synchronous components for the class. It just depends on the class that's being taught and how the faculty member has decided that they want to do remote learning. Honestly, a lot of faculty members are experimenting with new things for remote learning to make it more engaging and to make it better and to make it the best experience for students possible. So expect a little bit of time for people to shake these things out, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see how this goes, and hopefully you still have a pretty good experience doing remote learning with us. Let's talk about the requirements. These are the written requirements of our MS degree. I'll try to walk through each one of them. The bolded one is the most confusing one, so we'll talk about that also a little bit in more detail. In order to finish your MS degree here, you need 30 credits of coursework at the 500+ level. So whatever you do, almost all classes are 3 credits, so you need 10 classes to finish your MS degree. There are some seminars that are going to be 1 credit, so you would have to take 3 of those to kind of make this all work, but maybe you want to take a 1 credit class at some point. But basically you need 30 credits, or basically 10 classes of courses at the 500+ level. You need to take 4 core classes for your MS degree. We'll talk about what the core classes are in, I think, the next slide. You also need, so this is of those 10 classes. Sorry, I referred to. Of those 10 classes, 4 of them have to be core classes. You need at least 12, so this is 4 classes of non-independent study classes at the 600 plus level. Basically, you need 4 classes at the 600 level or above. But you cannot count independent study credits towards this requirement. Typically, a independent study is numbered 696. I don't know how I have all these things in my brain, but 696 is independent study. That does not count towards the 600 level requirement. Courses outside of computer science, so if you, for instance, took a math class or a stats class or a class in ECE that was at the 600 level or above, do count towards this requirement. So that's one thing you can do. Most students don't end up having a problem with this requirement. It just kind of happens. There are enough classes at the 600 level that you want to take that this just kind of happens by default. The same thing is true about the 4 core classes, as you're going to see in a moment. No more than 9 credits outside of computer science, and that means comp sci. So if you take a class that does not start with comp sci, CMP, SCI, then it is a course outside of computer science. You can take up to essentially 3 classes outside of computer science and count it towards your degree. A lot of students do this. They might take a math class, a stats class, a business class, finance class, all of these kinds of things. We do have a list. You do have to get these classes approved though. So you cannot take 600 level water polo or badminton or something like that. I don't think we actually have those, but if we did, you can't take 600 level badminton and count it towards your computer science master's degree. We have a list on our webpage of all the classes that are just approved by default. If it isn't on there, what you actually have to do is email me and Eileen and say, I would like to take the following class and count it towards my computer science degree, and I will say I approve or I don't approve. I believe I have never not approved a class. I think it's just because maybe nobody has proposed anything completely ridiculous. But I think the way to think about it is this, is if there's a graduate level class that's not in computer science that you can figure out a way to explain to me how this helps your computer science master's degree, I will accept it. No one has ever tried to give me an art or music class yet, but if you're doing digital music or say machine learning for music, there's probably a case to be made for a music class at the 600 level or above, but you're gonna have to have a pretty good story to tell me to figure out why I'm gonna approve that. A lot of students will use classes in ECE, they'll use classes in math stats. Actually, business school classes have become very popular. Look, computer science is embedded in almost every field now, especially finance, especially business. So all of these things are possible. In order to count one of these classes towards your 30 credits, you have to get a C or above. This is normally not a problem. If you get less than a C in a graduate class, something has gone seriously wrong. So this is normally not a problem. A few of you will have a serious problem during the semester and you will not get a C or better in the class, and then that's just not going to count. In the core classes, this is a little bit stricter. In the core classes, you're going to need to get a B or above. And I don't mean a B minus, I mean a B. So a B plus, an A minus, or an A in these classes in order to count them as core classes. You also need to have an overall GPA of a 3.0 or better. If you're new to the 4-point scale, a 3 is a B. So your average GPA has to be 3. There's a little bit of nuance to this in that it only is computed across the 30 credits you're using towards graduating. So if you happen to fail a class, which is a very exceptional and unusual circumstance, if you happen to fail a class, then this class would not count towards this 3.0 GPA, okay? Hopefully, this is not a problem for you, and it normally would not be a problem for students. It rarely comes up. If you have less than a 3.0 GPA, something is not going well, and really you ought to be in discussions with Elizabeth about, you know, what you're doing and what you could be doing better, and what you need in order to be more successful in our program. These are the requirements. So there are some other weird things that come up. We have something called, we don't have a thesis for master's students. There is no thesis option. Put that out of your mind. We just don't do that. There is something called a master's project, which is a 700 level class. Some students, it's often used by students getting a PhD, but the 700 level is kind of like an independent study in that it's independent research is done with a faculty member. A 700 level, so a 701 master's project, not required by any means, and most students don't do it, but if you choose to do it, you actually need 2 faculty members to work on it with you. And it does not count as an independent study, but it does count, so it does count towards this bolded rule, which is the 600 level. You can rewind and listen to that a few times if it didn't make sense. But essentially, if you take 701, you can count it as a 600 level or above class. It doesn't count as an independent study, etc. 701s are normally done for 6 credits. For master's students, we have a way you sign up for 3 credits in one semester and then 3 credits in the next semester. And you have 2 faculty members who work on this project with you. So that's separate from 696. So if you need, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about core classes first. Okay, so there are 3 core areas of computer science. This is a little bit maybe archaic, but we still do things this way. AI, which includes machine learning and things like that, and vision. Systems, which includes things like networking, programming languages, things like that. The best part of computer science, my own personal opinion. And then we have theory, which includes things like algorithms and computational theory and things of that manner. You must take 4 core classes. 3, so you have to basically take 1 from each area. So you have to take at least 1 theory class, 1 class that would be called AI or machine learning, and 1 class that is in systems, and then you got to take 1 other class. The other class just kind of happens almost by mistake. But you have to at least span these 3 areas, and you have to get a B in each one of these classes. What classes are core classes? Essentially, every class that we teach that's a normal class counts as a core class, and you'll see what area they fill in on our webpage. You can look up each class. Most of them are obvious, such as the machine learning class falls under AI, networking falls under systems, but there are some classes that we just don't even know what to do with it, such as there's a class called machine learning theory. So that actually would count as either one of them. Can't count as both, but it can count as one of the 2. So there's a list of those. If you find a class that's not on that list, let Eileen know and we'll put it into one of the buckets. It's usually pretty obvious what bucket falls into. So this does not apply to things like independent studies, master's project, seminars, or anything that's labeled as an experimental class. Every other normal class, lectures, exams, stuff like that will fall into one of these categories as a core class. This requirement isn't too hard, except some students are avoiding something, like they might be trying to avoid very hard to take any classes in theory whatsoever, but sorry, you have to take 1 class in theory. In theory has the fewest choices amongst the classes. Systems and AI have lots of choices. Theory, the most popular class for theory, well, there's 2 really. So one is called algorithms for data science. That is typically the easier of the 2 and the one that is the most popular for master's students, especially those who are not as strong in theory as other students. However, there's another class called 611, which is our algorithms class, which is really very, very popular. It is, however, known to be the hardest class that we teach. If you're really good at theory, it might not be the hardest class for you, but for most students, they find 611 to be the hardest class that we teach. Every once in a while, I survey the master's students and I ask, how many hours a week do you spend on each one of these classes? And then, and I mean, including exams, homework, lectures, everything, right? And so most classes are 10 hours a week or 10, 12 hours a week, something like that, which would be pretty typical. However, I often see a lot of students say that they spent 30 or sometimes 40 hours a week taking 611. So it depends on your strengths. I can't tell you how hard any particular class is going to be for you, but I do warn you that 611 is known to be fairly hard. 689, not as hard as 611 for most students, but it is also known to be quite time consuming. So there's a few classes like that do take a lot of time. Okay, So that's the core classes. Sometimes you can get out of core requirements if you really want to do this. You would have to have taken a graduate level class in that area, graduate level, not an undergraduate level, graduate level class in that area that would serve as a replacement for that class. So for instance, if you were an undergrad at our own institution and you took a graduate level algorithms class, you may have used it to graduate, but we will let you out of the core requirement. This does not give you any transcript credits. So you still have to come up with 30 credits, but we can get you out of the core requirement if that's something you need or want to do. Getting out of transcript credits is called transferring credits, and that is more complicated and a little bit harder, and you can't have used those credits for any other degree. So for instance, if you were an undergraduate in our program, you took a graduate level class, that graduate level class, you didn't use it for graduation in any way, shape, or form, then you would be able to use those credits perhaps towards your MS degree. If you happen to take it a graduate level class at another institution in, somewhere, either in the United States or internationally, and you didn't use it for a degree, we may be able to get you some transcript credits for that. There's a limit on how many you can do. It has to be equivalent to the class that we teach, so on and so forth. So there's some paperwork to do that. If that applies to you, Elizabeth can help you through that process, or you can read on the webpage what the forms are to get out of that stuff. So that's placing out of core. So this is what this would normally look like. None of this is going to look like this for you probably, because it just doesn't apply anymore given all of this remote teaching. But normally what you would do is take 3 classes in the fall, 3 classes in the spring, maybe 3 credits, 1 core. I don't know what 18. I think that means 9. It's the second year fall should be 9 more credits. Sorry, that says 3 credits, but it really should be 9 credits. And then in that following spring, you might take 1 class and you are looking for a job. Now, a lot of students are trying to figure out, wait a minute, I don't want to be here for 1 whole spring to take 1 class. So often what students will do is try to find a class during the summer, either in computer science, which is, there's not a lot. Honestly, we don't offer a lot of classes during the summer at the graduate level, but they might try to take one at another institution. They might want to take a remote learning class in another department or something like that. Okay, sorry, my son is bringing me something. So now there is also, so anyway, so most students are trying to figure out how to get this 3 credits somewhere else. So either during the summer or something like that, or maybe have some transfer credits or something like that. We generally recommend, I guess, spreading out your cores. It's really, I guess the way that I would state it is more about spreading out the difficult classes. And what is difficult depends on you. So it will depend. If you're weak in theory, you might want to take a theory class at the same time as taking 2 classes that you might find easier. It's hard to make everything work for you all of the time. But you just have to think about how I'm going to spread these classes out. Because as an undergrad, just to let you know, a lot of you're looking at this thinking, why am I only taking 3 classes in 1 semester? I'm used to taking 5 or maybe even 6 classes in 1 semester at the undergraduate level. You have to think in a different way. Graduate classes do not work like undergraduate classes. They are a lot more work. They are typically twice as hard. Obviously, that's a real rule of thumb, as they say, or it's sort of an estimate. It is considerably harder than taking an undergraduate class. Do not attempt to take 4 classes in your first semester. You probably aren't going to do that this fall anyway, but every once in a while somebody tries to do this. It doesn't work out very well. You're in fact not even allowed to take more than 12 credits in 1 semester, except by exceptional permission, and I hardly ever give it, to be honest with you. We want to save you from yourself in some cases. You really need to make sure that you don't over estimate your own abilities here to take these classes. These classes are much harder. They take a lot more time. So you are going to normally be taking 3 classes in a semester. With remote learning, so obviously the schedule might look a little bit different. If, for instance, this fall you take 1 class online, perhaps in the spring you take 3, either in person or even remote, and then you're done in 3 semesters, you know, not counting this fall. So it's just going to depend on what's difficult for you, what classes are available in the semesters that you're taking classes, and what happens with all of this COVID stuff as to what this plan is going to look like. Honestly, you can take this slide and probably throw it out the window, because probably whatever you're going to do is going to look a little, you know, very finely tuned for your own needs. Okay, so this is what this normally looks like, though. So there's this thing called a master's project, which I spoke about a little bit already. This is the 701 class. This is totally optional. Some students try to do it. It's research-oriented project, and it would be 6 credits. So it's the time of 2 graduate classes. And really, it ought to be more time than that, because you ought to be pouring your heart and your soul into this project in order to make it as great as possible. We don't have a thesis of any sort. It's not an option. Just don't do it. Too much work and not enough payoff for doing master's theses. So master's project, another option that might be available to you. Okay, how do you register for classes? Obviously, you register for classes through Spire. A lot of things fill up. I don't know what things look like currently. Normally, at this point in the semester, they would be full. I don't know what things look like at this point. You should register and get on a wait list for a class if you're interested in it. Don't sit in a class if you have no intention of taking it, because you would be tying up a slot perhaps for another student who could get off the wait list and get into the class. So if you're on the wait list and you think you're probably going to get in or whatever, you might just want to attend class anyway, for whatever attending means these days, and keep up with the class if you think you're going to be taking it. Okay, so that's registering for class. This last thing is about academic dishonesty, or academic honesty, really is the great way to say it. We expect this and we require it. In all of your coursework, everything needs to be your own work. You need to understand what the course policy is for what you are taking to figure out if collaboration is permitted in any way. Okay? Anything you do in research absolutely must be your own writing and must be your own work, and must be properly cited. We do not tolerate cheating and plagiarism at UMass. You may be used to a different set of ethical standards or practice or whatever you want to call it about how work was done with other people that you worked with at the institution you're coming from. You need to probably just reset your brain and start over and say, okay, this is how this is done at UMass, and really how it's done in the United States, okay, is that things are done such that academic honesty is of paramount importance. And I will say, sadly, that too many master's students have gotten themselves into an awful lot of trouble while they were here at UMass with this kind of issues. Professors check, they look at your work, they compare it using programs to look for similarities, they look around the internet. Look, do not attempt to get away with things. You are basically going to cause yourself an awful lot of pain. And let me explain it this way. In academia, and really in the working world in general, you are really only as good as your reputation. So what will happen is you go off, you do something wrong. Say you're in my class, right? And you commit academic dishonesty, and I catch you doing it, and there's some penalty or something like that. You graduate somehow, right? And you go off and you work at Google or Amazon or something like that, or you want to work at Google or Amazon, and somebody interviewing you or is thinking about working with you says, oh, I know Mark, I think I'll call him and find out something about this student. And they'll call me, and I'm not going to give you a very good recommendation, am I? But that's just me. Look, this applies across the board. Academic honesty and general ethical principles across the board are the soul of what makes you a great researcher, okay? And I can't, it almost seems like whatever I say at this point doesn't sink into about 10% of your brains. And I think you really need to think about this very carefully. I understand graduate school can be difficult. You may get yourself into a situation where you feel like you need to do something in order to get through this class. And all I can say is stop yourself, do not do it, counsel your friends not to do it, and take the bad grade. The bad grade is going to be better for you in the end than having this mark on your transcript or on your reputation, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't like to dwell on this point, but unfortunately it just kind of misses some students every once in a while, and they get themselves into a lot of trouble while they're here doing their graduate degree. I would urge you to think about this very carefully. Okay, so that's, you know, again, normally this is where you would ask me a lot of questions about things that I glossed over or you didn't understand. Students normally have a lot of questions about CPT stuff. We will be giving you more information about that as it progresses over the fall. But I do urge you to think about what your questions are. Let Elizabeth know. She'll be orienting you as well. You'll get other orientations from the graduate school here. And hopefully I've given you some useful information, or maybe I've made you think of some questions that you didn't think of even before you heard this talk, but that's great. So if you have those questions, get back to Elizabeth and let's get them answered as best we can. Again, welcome to UMass, even in a remote fashion. And we do look forward to having you here in person as soon as we can. And I'm sure that that's going to happen soon, and we really look forward to it. And thank you.